This is the Stacking Days Podcast, the podcast about the healing experience of recovery for people of color by people of color. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. We suggest you seek out the support of a trained professional for guidance with your specific circumstance. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and I've been alcohol-free since September 2021. Welcome to the show. Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast. We got another great episode for you. The individual who I have on, I've actually been following probably since the inception of the Stacking Days podcast, and just haven't been able to line it up where I could get her on, but we finally done it. The stars and the planets have aligned. And we have Prakruti on with us today to share her story, number one, and then also just kind of talk about the tools, the tricks, the tips that she has, in her pursuing her sobriety. So without further ado, I'd love to invite her to the mic and the show. Prakruti, welcome to the Stacking Days podcast.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Thank you, Ray, for having me. It really means a lot that you want to hear part of my story. And I appreciate your efforts in pronouncing my name. Names are very important to us Indian people. So there's an Indian way of saying my name where you put the emphasis on the first syllable. So it's Prakruti.
Okay.
And the Americanized way, which is Prakruti, which is probably what I say, but it's Sanskrit, which is recognized as one of the oldest languages. And it means, the easy version, it means nature. The more extensive version, it means the foundation for everything, the basis of life kind of thing.
Okay.
So my name has a lot of meaning. So I do my best to, not set people up to fail. I try to spell it phonetically. I work for the Reframe app, and I host meetings for folks who want to be alcohol-free or identify as being alcohol-free. So I spell it phonetically every single time. And I do my best to help people because my name means so much to me. For years, I had a nickname, like many immigrants. But these days, I don't want to whitewash it, Americanize it, make it different for other people to feel comfortable. But, when you're younger, sometimes you do things, or I'll speak for myself. I did things to try to fit in, but now I embrace all those things that are super unique about me. And Prakruti is not even a common Indian name, so it's super special, and I embrace it now. So people ask me for a nickname, and there is no nickname. It's just Prakruti.
Well, I appreciate you, giving me kudos on pronouncing your name right. I think names are extremely important. Mine's, not as unique as yours, but I too am very specific around, how, especially my last name, I'm, specific around how people pronounce it. And I'm glad that you clarified that. And I'm also glad that I didn't butcher it at the same time. I want to go all the way back, to the beginning of your story. When your relationship, with alcohol even started, or even before then, kind of leading you into that space. And we can kind of take it from there and see where we go.
Yeah, sounds good. I think I used to refer to myself as the brown sheep of the family, meaning that I never felt like I belonged, in my family dynamic, my family of origin. I just felt different. And now I have the ability to reframe that, and I see myself as the cycle breaker. And I don't see it necessarily as a bad thing that I don't belong. But when I was younger, it was challenging to not feel like I could relate to my family of origin. But I also just didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I didn't feel Indian enough. I didn't feel American enough. So yeah, I think some of my substance use started trying to belong, trying to fit in. So probably around 15, 16. These shared experiences having to do with substances. And now I'm so grateful that I see that we can have shared experiences without substances, and they're more authentic, and the connections are stronger. Because that was one thing I remember being afraid of when I started this alcohol-free journey almost 3.5 years ago. I was afraid of not being able to connect with others and have these shared experiences, but those fears are no longer there. So
that's awesome.
So yeah, I initially started, because I was trying to fit in.
So your family, your parents, are they American or are they Indian? And I'm assuming that you're born here, but I don't want to assume. So I'm trying to get a perspective on kind of the culture that you were, kind of brought up in, that you had a hard time identifying with.
Yeah, they're Indian. So they were born in India, and I'm first generation born in this country.
Okay.
Being first generation born here comes with a lot of stuff. I also experienced a sexual assault when I was 15 or 16. My timelines get funny, as it does for those of us who have experienced trauma. Mm-hmm. And I won't go into details to make sure I keep everybody safe. But that experience negatively impacted the way that I then viewed myself and the world. And it's kind of like the textbook story of, some sort of trauma, the big T or the little t, and then you self-medicate, you try to numb and avoid coping with it, and you use a substance. And then I experienced the depressive symptoms after that. So it's kind of like the textbook story that many people can relate to, and that's how mine looked also.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear, of that incident in your past, and appreciate you not, sharing details in case, folks out there potentially can get triggered and feel uncomfortable. I want to ask you from a cultural perspective, and I was having a conversation with another guest of mine who is also of Indian descent, and she was mentioning that, alcoholism, substance use really isn't a thing in Indian culture. Is that something that you experienced as well? And if that's the case, how did you, the early years when you were struggling, how did that kind of overlap with the expectations that were coming from your family and maybe what they were seeing in you?
Yeah, so it's funny because I feel like when I was an adolescent, I was a rebel for drinking. And now I feel like I'm a rebel for not drinking. So yeah, back then it was, there were a lot of expectations and a lot of comparisons. I always felt like, I don't know if you've heard of this term, good girl conditioning, but especially for us brown women, it's kind of like a martyrdom, like people pleasing is ingrained in our culture. And then twofold, I also experienced it as a trauma response. So because I was sexually assaulted, we have fight or flight, but we also have freeze and fawn. And fawning is correlated to codependence or people pleasing. So that's a big way that I'm also breaking cycles. I have 2 daughters. I've got identical twin girls, and they're 9 years old. And I'm making sure that the good girl conditioning stops, and they're able to advocate for themselves and take care of themselves and not put other people first. But like with the Indian culture, it's a group-oriented worldview. And the American culture is more of like an individualistic, like world perspective. So it's 2 opposing, perspectives. So in my culture, you put the good of the group, the community, ahead of yourself. So I'm doing my best to stop that. But yeah, when I was an adolescent, I looked like a bad girl. Like I wasn't studying for the SATs like all the other Indian children on my street. And I went to the University of Chicago laboratory schools from 3rd grade until I graduated high school. That's where Obama's girls went. And it's like a very good prep school. And everybody was very concerned with getting into Stanford or Harvard or Yale. And I was concerned with my happiness. And it wasn't just the Indian community that thought that was strange, but it was also, the people at my school that were kind of like, happiness. What does that have to do with anything? Perhaps they thought the goal of getting into these Ivy League schools would produce the happiness. But for me, I was always, ever since I can remember, I was concerned with being happy. So my mental, yeah.
How were you pursuing? First of all, how did you identify what happiness was at that point in time, and how did you go about trying to pursue that was completely kind of in conflict to everyone around you's perception of what happiness was?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't have so much of the language back then, but I knew that I was not happy, and I knew that it was important to me. I don't know. I care very much what other people think. I would be lying if I said that I didn't, but I've never cared enough, like, where it deters me from behaving in the manner that I wish to behave. So I've always been able to, like, be myself, even though I do care. Of course I care what people think, but it doesn't it's never affected the way that I live my life. So I don't know. Maybe it was so important to me because I didn't have it. And it's also, one of the reasons that I went into the psych field. I did a master's in clinical professional psychology with a specialization in children and family studies. And this again was to like figure out my brain and try to achieve that happiness. But, they say the more that you chase things, you kind of like push it away. But spoiler alert, I'm finally happy for the first time in my life at age.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you were. I mean, sometimes the pursuit of happiness is a long-term pursuit, right? It's not it's not something that you're instantly kind of shown and gratified with. So I'm glad that you stayed on that track. I'm sure that it was filled with its challenges, but getting to where you are now is a great place to be. So at what point in time did you identify that, maybe you had an issue that you needed to address? It seems like in high school, moving into college, it was kind of just core to your identity. Obviously you were, medicating, and, I almost think sometimes that, the self-medication isn't necessarily a bad thing because it helps you kind of get through some of the challenges that you're trying to protect yourself against. But at what point in time did you identify that, maybe you had an issue that you needed to take a closer look at?
A couple years ago, almost 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
was the time. But yeah, these are individual journeys. And so for me, my active addiction, that's the language that I like to use for myself. But my active addiction looked like binging. And binging did me a disservice because it kept me in denial for a lot longer. Because I don't know, I feel like our culture, tends to normalize binging, especially as an adolescent. Binging just looks like normal American behavior, and in college as well. So yeah, I don't know. I did go to outpatient rehab in my 20s, but I did it for research purposes to learn what it's like to be on the other side as a client. And I actually did learn a lot. I learned about the mesolimbic dopaminergic reward pathway, and how substances like affect the physiology of our brain. So I learned all these things that later on I recognized was very important. But at the time I was in denial myself. But yeah, this is the first time that I've really done the sober thing. So yeah, about 3 years and 4 months ago is when I really recognized that I had a problem. And it's the first time that I hurt my children directly due to my use. I wasn't there to spend my birthday with them. And that was it for me. So I started this journey for them, but it's not sustainable to continue this journey for somebody else. So I'm certainly doing it for myself at this point. But yeah, like we all have different rock bottoms. And in my 20s, I remember overdosing and going to the hospital. I remember being tachycardic. So my heart rate was something crazy. And I remember being treated as less than human by my husband at the time, by the EMT, by the hospital staff, because they just look at people who are using drugs as like not worth their time. They don't really recognize it as an illness. It's more like a moral failing. So I just was treated quite poorly at that time. And that wasn't even my rock bottom. And I never had any legal repercussions because of my use. I completed that master's with almost all A's. I was married. I had children. I modeled for 10 years in Chicago. I did like an international billboard. I did all kinds of things. But yeah, I just, for me, it was basically harming my children. And then I got a taste of what sobriety is like. And yeah, I don't know. The first step to the happiness thing was stopping the substances. And then I was able to like myself, and I feel like I'm very close to loving myself. So I'm never going back. I've spent too much of my life not liking myself. So
yeah, I mean, there's certainly a newfound and unique clarity that comes with sobriety that you just can't replicate. Otherwise, I feel like I'm glad you're able to find that space. Sounds like you've had a wonderful life, but I also know how it is to have a wonderful life, and there be an elephant in the room, or a cloud, so to speak, kind of dampening your parade. So 3.5 years ago, you make this decision. Okay, I'm going to move in a different direction. what were some of the early kind of mechanisms and tools and support structures that you turned to in order to pursue sobriety, number one, and then number two, to maintain early sobriety? Because those days are really, really challenging, especially after you've been drinking or using for such a long time.
Well, first I want to say something on what you were saying about like having a wonderful life, but then having that elephant in the room. Yeah, like, so this is like a big thing in my culture. If I ever express like depressive symptoms or sadness or any negative emotions, I'm always met with, oh, but you have such a blessed life and you have this and that. And so I just think it's important to remember that we can be more than one thing at the same time. I can be grateful and sad at the same time. Just because I'm experiencing something negative doesn't mean that I'm not grateful for all the other things that I have. And that's like been a big thing that I met with, like, oh, just count your blessings, or you're so blessed. I'm aware that I'm blessed, and I am aware of the things that I have that are just so amazing. But it doesn't mean that I don't experience hard things also. I can have all of it. So I just wanted to say that. But yeah, early sobriety was really challenging for me. I'm currently in the middle of a divorce, and I did not have a sufficient support system. And I hear a lot of people saying, I did it with the help of my spouse or thanks to my partner. And I feel like I did it in spite of him. It was really hard. He had alcohol in the house, but that's his own journey. So I am going to try my best to not speak about his story, but it did affect my story. But in the end, my sobriety, my mood, my day, it's all on me. It's not contingent on other people's behaviors. And I really learned that more year 2. Mm-hmm. I learned how to reframe. I can literally reframe anything, any situation now, which is pretty cool that I work for the Reframe app also, because framing is it's a game changer. Like, oh, dog bit my face. Like, oh, the universe is telling me like, looks are fleeting and what I'm working on the inside is the long lasting stuff. Yeah, I can reframe just about anything. But yeah, back to that year 1, AA actually really got me through that year 1. Okay. And I know that, some people's journeys don't align with AA, but AA has a saying that says, take what works for you and leave the rest. And that's literally what I do. The core principles, the core values of AA are actually parallel to the Hindu scriptures. So these are universally applicable things, and they are applicable to everyone's lives, whether people identify as being in recovery or not. So if we can, separate maybe the people who run the meetings or this and that with those core values, we can actually get a lot from AA. Yeah, the big book, the AA book, Alcoholics Anonymous, uses a lot of dated language. I'm big on linguistics. So not only do I think names matter, but linguistics are very important. There are a lot of words that our brains cannot process in any positive manner. And a lot of those words are in the big book. Yeah.
Did you walk into AA with that perspective and that open mind? Or is that something you kind of came to over time? And again, just for those who are listening to the show, there's no dogma on Stacking Days. I think that whomever is going to pursue sobriety, whatever works for you, and if the first thing doesn't work, try something else, right? But I am curious what your perspective was on AA going into it. It sounds like you have a unique perspective now, but at the time, what was your thought process?
Yeah, it's really about like unity versus conformity. So like you said, like, we can have all these different paths, but our goals are the same. Sure. So it's, unity versus conformity. But yeah, when I went into AA, I don't know that I had a thought in my head. This was 2 weeks coming off of the longest binge I had ever been on. And I was physically and mentally and emotionally wrecked. I just remember being in that meeting and crying my eyes out and being met with so much love and support. And I just remember feeling like I finally belonged. And initially, I even questioned, like, I don't identify as an alcoholic. I identify as an addict. That's the language I use for myself. Even back then, in early sobriety, in year 1, I questioned whether I was an addict or not. But the more in-person AA meetings I went to, the more stories I heard. I was like, oh, that sounds like me, and they call it a thinking disease. And I could truly relate to people's thought processes. So perhaps I haven't engaged in all the same behaviors, but when I was doing my master's in psychology, my psych training, we learned that we don't have to experience everything to relate to a client. If a client comes to me and is struggling with heroin use, I don't have to have done heroin to be able to help this client. You universalize the feeling, you boil it down to the general feeling like anger, sadness, and we can all certainly relate to all those feelings. So yeah, it was kind of like the same thing, but I don't know. It served its purpose. I had two different sponsors. It's just kind of like therapists as well. Like different therapists serve a purpose at different points of my life. The two sponsors served a purpose at the two different parts of my year one. But yeah, I don't know. Like I never saw anybody that looked like me in those rooms. And I even tried to share on that at a meeting. And somebody said to stop looking at the differences and to focus on the similarities. And yes, 100%, but we can't deny that I am brown. Like people who say, oh, they see me and they only see a beautiful woman, they don't see my color. If you don't see my color, you're like denying my existence.
Sure.
Like so much identity. Like I am a brown woman. So yeah, I found it challenging. And I also went to NA. My drug of choice was actually cocaine. So 3 years and 4 months ago, I stopped alcohol, nicotine, marijuana, and cocaine. So I went to NA and
that's a lot.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's a lot.
Thank you. And I didn't turn evil to my knowledge. So, but yeah, I went to NA as well, and I didn't see one brown person, and it was challenging. The medallions that you get, mm-hmm. like in NA, my year one, I bought myself like this Rosie the Riveter. And I'm like, this is so cute, but I wish she looked like me. So I decided to make a medallion that looks like me. So I had a brown Wonder Woman coin made for myself.
That's awesome.
Because I've never seen it. And I hope we can have like a black Batman medallion would be cool, I think. But yeah, I don't know. It's challenging. I went to the NA convention in Chicago at the McCormick Place. Huge venue. The last time I'd been there, I was doing some modeling stuff. Very powerful because it's such a huge venue and there's so many people. It was actually primarily Black people. And again, not one brown person in the entire room besides me. So I don't know. It's challenging. I don't see brown people in these spaces. And, the world's not just black and white, literally or figuratively. Like in the psych world, black or white thinking or splitting is a cognitive distortion. And figuratively, literally also, like, I'm brown and I'm here. I'm in these spaces as well.
What's your perspective on that? Why do you feel that in your experience, you're not seeing more brown folks? I mean, I've had a similar conversation before. I'm curious, is it because there's a degree of shame that comes with being open and exposed and vulnerable? Or is it, I know it's not because they don't exist, because that just doesn't make any sense. So I am curious what you think.
Yeah, no, there are AA meetings in India. I was hoping to get to one last year when I went to India, but I didn't because I'm really curious to see what that looks like. Yeah. There's still so much taboo and stigma. And, previously I was talking about that good girl conditioning. Having a substance use problem or issue or challenge, whatever language works for us, like it doesn't align with being a good girl, right? Like you just don't air your dirty laundry to a third party, which is also why I didn't get the professional help that I deserved when I was 15 or 16 and I was sexually assaulted, because you simply don't go. You don't go and air your dirty laundry. You only speak about the good. You brush everything under the rug. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that I'm working on breaking for my children. I talk about the bad and the ugly with my children as well. And on social media as well. I don't necessarily have pictures of the bad, but I write words. I write authentically, like about the bad as well and the ugly, in hopes that other people will do the same. And that's why I've been recovering out loud since day one as well. I'm waiting for the day that I see someone that looks like me also recovering out loud. I know they're out there, and last year I had the honor of speaking on this expert panel, and it was a panel of like psychiatrists, and I have a master's in psychology, but I also spoke on the other side of it as someone who's on this sober journey. And it was a couple hundred people there, and a lot of Indian people. And I know my parents were super nervous. My mother especially. I think she was concerned with what people are going to think. But I was received with so much love, and it was a ripple effect because I gave other people permission to share as well. And I had several women of different ages come and share some things with me about their lives. And that just made it all worth it. And I wanted to show that, like, regardless of your socioeconomic background, your academic background, your race, your gender, all of these things, like, you can still experience these, like, substance abuse issues.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it certainly doesn't discriminate, against anyone. And I do agree with you. It's so important to be an example. And I know that sometimes, being the trailblazer, on a path is challenging to do. But you've obviously seen, how the ripple effect and what that can mean for someone who just needs that additional encouragement or someone to look to and say, well, if she could do it or he could do it, then I can do it. So I think that's extremely powerful. So please continue to do what you're doing, from that standpoint. You mentioned your family and how they perceived that you would be viewed, maybe perceived how they would be viewed, by virtue of you being, open and apologetic. How have they been able to manage over the last 3.5 years, or even, leading into that? I'm sure that maybe, at this point they recognize that, you had an issue as well. You finally addressed it. But how have they managed this kind of new you, and the reality of what it took for this new you to come to pass?
So I think it's hard, perhaps, for some people to understand the difference between fault versus responsibility, right? Like, it's not my fault that I was sexually assaulted. It's not my fault that I had substance abuse issues. It's not my fault that I had these depressive symptoms. But now I've taken responsibility and I'm doing my best to do something about it. I don't know if immigrants necessarily have the luxury of worrying about happiness. And so I think a lot of these concepts might be foreign, including boundaries. I think the most challenging thing for my family and the new me right now has been my ability to finally establish and maintain boundaries. And what that might look like to them is something harsh, or that I'm punishing them, when what I'm really doing is respecting myself and protecting myself. And in turn, I'm teaching my children to do the same. And my thoughts initially were, wouldn't my parents be happy for me that I finally know how to set boundaries? Like, because I would be so happy for my children, but how can they be happy for me about something that they don't know how to do themselves, right? Like if they can't forgive themselves or, set boundaries, how can they possibly be happy about that for me, right? So I think that's the biggest discrepancy, because the relationships, all my interpersonal relationships certainly have changed, with my relationship with alcohol changing, especially my relationship with myself as well. But yeah, it can look challenging. Being able to set boundaries is a journey. Initially, I think it was more like a sledgehammer.
Mm-hmm.
But now I think I've finally figured out how to do it. But like I said, our Indian culture is very very connected. It's a group-oriented world perspective. So setting boundaries can look like something negative. Also going against this good girl conditioning. Like saying no is like, what?
Right.
Because there's that people-pleasing aspect. So
how do you protect your daughters against that aspect of the culture? I mean, obviously, they are, they follow your lead, but at the same time, they're also individuals, even though they're only, 9. How do you kind of inculcate them and in this kind of alternate, perspective on how to view your culture and how they can kind of integrate with their grandparents and the rest of the community?
Yeah. So my children are half white and half brown,
Okay.
half Indian, but they identify as being Indian, and they do go to like a spiritual school that my mom runs, and they love learning about my culture, but they are very emotionally intelligent, very self-aware, and the modeling works the best. Like I was trying to teach them how to love themselves for years. But now that they see me doing these things, like sobriety is an act of self-love, setting boundaries is an act of self-love, it really does work. And they understand the nuances here of the culture, and they're able to advocate for themselves when they feel like they're not being treated well. They're like, no, like quitting is okay sometimes, especially when something is becoming detrimental to your own well-being. They're able to be like, no, and not worry about feeling shame or guilt because they stopped doing something, So I'm very proud of them, and they actually thank me for breaking cycles. So they're very aware, and they know what sobriety is in terms of as related to alcohol use. Like if kids are, like, we went to see the Barbie movie yesterday and they were promoting alcohol. So if they can see that stuff, they can certainly learn about sobriety as well.
Yeah. I don't know how you feel about this, but I am just blown away by how evolved children are these days. I mean, when I was 9 years old, I don't know that I would have been as, developed in that way where I could kind of just set those boundaries for myself and, be so authentic in who I wanted to be, which is maybe one of the reasons why I ultimately started drinking. But hats off to you in parenting them that way. I mean, I know they've probably seen a fair amount of your progression, and that's a teacher in its own right. But hats off to you in sticking in there and just being a fantastic parent to them.
Yeah, I know this is going to be controversial, but my children swear. And I think failure is actually the real F word. Like, I don't think is a bad word. And my kids say it. They know when not to. They don't say it in front of mama. That's my mother. They don't say it at school. They take school very seriously, and they do really well. There have been no complaints. But we don't use the word failure in our house. That's the real F word. Failure is one of those words that our brains cannot process in a positive manner. It's processed as something permanent, meaning it cannot change. So we talk about mistakes in this household. Mistakes are processed as temporary, meaning they can change as long as we acknowledge them and learn from them. So they're allowed to make mistakes. We talk about mistakes, but we don't use failure when speaking about ourselves.
I love that. I mean, you effectively are creating. I mean, you have a very strong culture that you've created, in your home for your children, and I almost think sometimes also stepping into sobriety is very much so like a cultural shift, and as it is a lifestyle shift for anyone. So. The fact that your children are able to, you had mentioned this earlier, the ripple effect that comes with one's healing, the fact that they are able to benefit from the hard choices and decisions that you had to make in your life for yourself is probably one of the greatest gifts that you could have ever given them. That sounds like they're evolved enough to even know that, but even if they weren't, I think that's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's always important to give folks their flowers. Parenting's a hard gig, man, and so to be able to do that in the midst of learning yourself is something that's not short of miraculous sometimes.
Like people say, I gave you life, to their children, but like, I don't think I would be alive if it wasn't for my children. And I truly mean that. They really were the catalyst for change for me. They're the reason that I never gave up. There were times where I had suicidal ideation, and I was able to make it because of them. Again, it's not sustainable to continue these journeys for somebody else, but they were the catalyst for change for me. Just knowing that like my decisions make such an impact on them, like that's what motivates me. Like I try to be very responsible with my words, very intentional with the things that I do to the best that I can. And, like being in the middle of a divorce is challenging. It's wild to say that I've never been so happy or peaceful, but it's like my to-do lists are insane right now, but I make sure that I'm on my to-do list every single day. And that's how I'm not only surviving, but thriving. And I show them, I want them to see that I put myself on my to-do list, either get my nails done, as silly as that might sound, or get my hair done, or go to the gym and dance it out and do Zumba, or eat my taco dip and watch Real Housewives, like whatever it is. Like tonight I'm going to an event, not a sober event, but I can talk about my plan for that as well. But I want them to see that I take care of myself. I don't want M to be for martyrdom, like mom to be for martyrdom. Like I don't want that good girl conditioning where I put everybody else first. Like I want them to see that I also take care of myself, and fun is a choice. Like sometimes fun is work. Like we have a pool and it's a lot of fun, but like there's a lot of prep and aftermath and during, and it's all on me. So fun is work and fun is a choice, but it's the difference between surviving and thriving. And I consider myself thriving right now, even though I'm in the middle of like a major life stressor. So,
I've seen, children grow into adulthood and they've had mothers that never learned to care for themselves. And, in retrospect, it almost creates this scenario where there's this underlying disdain because they never saw that as an example. And in turn, it has become so difficult for them to figure out how do they put themselves first. So the fact that you have the forethought to look at it that way, again, I mean, hats off. I think ultimately your girls will be, the benefactors for something like that for sure. Talk to me about where you're at now with Reframe. What is the work that you're doing outside of your kind of origin and your core family that is all fantastic, but how are you kind of giving back into the broader ecosystem for folks who can benefit from your path and from all of your learnings?
Yeah, so there's this term called seva, and it's kind of like acts of service, which is also spoken about in AA. So I've been raised knowing how to help others. I wasn't taught how to help myself, so that part's new. But helping others, I've been doing that since I can remember.
Right.
So in some way, shape, or form, I give back to the community. I practiced psychotherapy prior to having my children, but I did recognize that was to the detriment of my own well-being. I just didn't have a sufficient support system, and I never learned how to detach, which made me a fabulous therapist for my client, but not so great for myself. So now I have figured out different ways to help people that don't harm me. And these days when I ask my reframers to reach out to me, I can say that and truly mean that and not have them reach out to me and then I resent them later. You know what I mean? Like when I offer help these days, I truly mean it. I have the capacity for it. I know what I can and cannot handle at this time. And it's a beautiful feeling. So at this time in the summer, what I can handle is I host one meeting a week. It's about 200 to 230 participants each week. It's for people who identify as being on the alcohol-free path. There's two paths on the app. There's a cutback path, and then there's an alcohol-free path. I feel like I'm only qualified to be of service to the alcohol-free people. So that's what I do. And I use my psych knowledge, even though I'm no longer a licensed professional. I didn't lose that knowledge. So I've got that stuff. So we work on adaptive or healthy coping skills, changing habits. I used to do a sober travels room on a different app. So I have lots of tips, especially in the summer for folks who want to travel, sober vacays. And that stuff is also applicable when you're going to an event. Like I'm going to an event tonight. So I would suggest, having accountability buddies, people you can call on, which has actually helped me in real life in year one. And also having an exit strategy and an entrance strategy. All those things helped me. And then playing the tape forward. So that's a technique that we use where you think about what would happen if you have a drink. But my sneaky addict brain tends to stop at like the kind of bad, but not that bad. Like, oh, maybe I don't know where my car is, or like, who are these people next to me? So I have to make sure that I play it all the way through to the next day where I'm, engaging in self-loathing or I'm experiencing suicidal ideation. So I have to make sure to play that tape all the way through to remind myself why I am not doing this. And although I do not identify as an alcoholic, I recognize that if I have one drink, sometimes I'm okay. And sometimes it's 2 days later and I've been binging on cocaine. So I recognize that is an option. Once I take that sip, I am no longer in control. I've lost my autonomy. So yeah, that's what I do on the Reframe app. I give my experience, strength, and hope, things I've learned in AA, things I've learned in life, things I learned in outpatient rehab, things I learned in my master's degree, things I've learned as a mom. Yeah, all of it.
That's awesome. playing the tape forward is probably one of the most powerful tools that you can, and really, it's once you get used to doing it, it's easy to kind of tap into, right? But it's such a powerful tool to be able to input. Again, I mean, summer, vacations, but you really can use it, any and anywhere, right? Like there is no limitation on where you can kind of play that thing forward. And, I've definitely turned to that. I just actually came back from vacation, and I was staying at a beautiful hotel. And, when you're on vacation, you want to sit by the pool and you want to drink a cocktail. But I did exactly what you just said. I played that tape forward, and I said to myself, well, what is my 4-day vacation going to look like if I start drinking here at the pool at 11 a.m., and I just saw a whole bunch of bad. And ultimately, obviously, I didn't drink and had a fantastic vacation, but that tool is extremely important to be able to implement.
Yeah, so much freedom in sobriety. Like, I don't have to be when I go on vacation, like, where's my next drink coming from? Where's the smoking section? Like, oh, the line for the bar looks too long. Maybe I should get 2 drinks. Like, it frees up a lot of time. And then there's no hangovers. So I just have all this more time for the fun. And I actually did Vegas sober this year, and I drove a Ferrari. I did lots of fun things, and none of it involved alcohol. So
it's funny you mentioned Vegas. I've been to Vegas. I never was a huge fan of Vegas,
Oh.
even though I would go and do the things that people do in Vegas. I went to Vegas also for the first time this past year and had the best time ever. Like I went to a Tiesto concert. I got to see Adele, and all of these things were just like real memories that I have a full grasp on, to this day, as opposed to like 3 days that were a complete blur. And, I'm flying back home hungover. I mean, it was a fantastic trip. So, I mean, I think that if they have an opportunity, go find you on Reframe for some more of those tips and tricks.
Or on Instagram. I'm happy to help people for free as well at this time.
Appreciate that. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions as we kind of take this in here for a landing. One of them is a little bit, of a fastball. The other one's probably an easier toss up. So which one would you like first?
Dealer's choice.
Cool. Dealer's choice. Here comes the fastball. During those days when you were probably struggling the most, 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, how would someone who was close to you have known that you were struggling without you explicitly telling them?
Well, I'm very clear. So I recognize, I have the awareness. So I recognize when I'm struggling, and I'm not shy about it. So I do explicitly tell people. So I don't set people up to fail with things, there's no question of whether I need help or not. And I know that people always say communication is the key, but I don't know, because I feel like I'm very good at communicating. I communicate really well and clearly my needs and wants, but it doesn't mean that other people are going to receive them. And sometimes it's like a want versus can't problem. So either they don't want to help or they can't help. But either way, they're not helping. So yeah, I am pretty good at communicating my needs, but it doesn't mean that people are going to receive it, or maybe they do receive it and they either can't or they won't do anything about it. So yes, it's very clear when I'm struggling. I've never been somebody that's been able to pretend. You will know exactly what mood I'm in and what is happening, either by what I look like, my affect, or my words. But there is no guessing game with what is happening with me.
I love that. Just that open book transparency. Fantastic.
But again, mean that other people are going to receive or be capable of helping me. But on my end, I'm pretty good at sharing what's happening with me.
Awesome. I wish I was like that. I feel like folks need to peel a few more layers of the onion back sometimes to figure out where I'm coming from. But
yeah,
it's something that I'm continuing to work on.
Well, you seem very empathetic, so I thought that maybe went with that. But
I tend to be empathetic, but I also need to be mindful about being more mindful.
Yeah.
Last question I have for someone who's sitting there listening to this, and maybe they're on the fence, maybe they are unsure of whether or not they want to be alcohol free or take a pause, and maybe they're curious but maybe they've come to a point where they say, I absolutely have an issue that I need to address here, but I don't know what the first step is that I could take. What would you suggest to that person?
Well, there's another saying in AA that says, sick and tired of being sick and tired. You get to this point where you're sick and tired. You want something to be different. And in order to see something different, you got to do something different. I would say reach out to somebody. Reach out to somebody like me that's got some alcohol-free time. I still consider myself a newcomer, meaning that I still have so much to learn. But now in year 3, I really see the sense of peace that I've been waiting my entire life for. And again, these are individual journeys. So just because it took me 3 years doesn't mean it's going to take somebody else 3 years. It might take more time. But yeah, off the top of my head, I would just say to reach out to somebody else. There's this other AA saying that says the gist of it is if you see somebody who's got what you want, to be around them kind of thing. So if you guys want what I have, then come talk to me, and I will share everything, when I went to Vegas, I was concerned at first, maybe people will think I'm a Debbie Downer and they won't want to be around me, you associate places like Vegas with drinking. And it was a friend's 40th birthday. So you associate celebrations with drinking. And I'm like, I don't think anyone's going to want to be around me. But it turns out that I showed them a different way of living. People saw that I was still having fun without substances. And then it kind of planted the seed for them. And one of them actually comes to my Reframe meetings now and has been alcohol-free ever since. So it looks like sobriety is contagious, just like misery is contagious. So figure out what you want and who's got that, and surround yourself with those type of people. Yeah.
Sobriety gives you an opportunity to be a leader for sure. That's fantastic. I want folks to be able to find you. You'd mentioned Instagram. I'm sure Reframe. Where can folks find you if they want more?
Brown Wonder Woman 2023 is my handle on Instagram. And like I said, names matter, linguistics matter. So when you guys create handles, I would encourage you guys to also think about the words. Like if you put stressed in your handle, it's kind of like the self-fulfilling prophecy. So just being intentional with the way you live. So Brown Wonder Woman 2023 is my handle. And please reach out to me. I'm happy to help. So
awesome. Well, look, I really do appreciate you spending some time with me today. I think you added a bunch of value to the broader conversation, and also just a pleasure to have you on the Stacking Days podcast. So Prakruti, thank you so much for spending some time.
Thank you so much for giving me the space to share some of my story, and I really am honored. People like you reach out to me and give me a space to talk as a brown woman in sobriety. And I'm honored to be on the Reframe app as a leader in the sober community as a brown woman. Yeah, it just means a lot. So thank you so much.
You're absolutely, welcome. You're a shining example, and I'm glad that we were able to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's stay in contact, and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to the Stacking Days podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, email me at rdg@stackingdays.com or follow us on Instagram @stackingdays. If you like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, and by all means share it with a friend who you think needs to be invited into the conversation. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.